Mark, how you doing, my friend?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, I'm thrilled. I keep saying I'm super excited, but I mean it every single time I say it. Particularly with you, because of the work that you have done. You've been in the space for many years now, and you have done some innovative work. And you went over from UHG United Healthcare Group to Emsi. If you would, please introduce yourself and what you do there at Emsi and what we're going to be talking about today.
Happy to. Well, yeah, just been super privileged to be a part of PAFOW and getting to know you, Al, and the team. And yeah, a little bit about my background. So yeah, Mark Hanson. I help on our product side here at Emsi Burning Glass. Do a lot of strategy work and skills work, and so wear many hats. But previously, I was able to use this wonderful data that we have, all this rich labor market information, and was applying it at United Health Group, like you mentioned. So helped on their people analytics team for 5 years and was able to do tons of fun projects and got really ingrained in everything from diversity and inclusion reporting to talent acquisition work and all the reporting needs and strategy that goes around that, to site selection, to workforce planning. So we touched a little bit of everything during my time there. And so it's been fun to be on the other side of seeing how the sausage is made on the data side and how we can provide insights to others, and some of the cool innovative people that we get to work with to come up with new products and new solutions to help out. So yeah, been fun to be in the industry and get to know people and really just work hand in hand with our customers to solve their all the issues that are popping up, especially in this crazy talent market that we have right now.
Well, it's going to be crazy probably for the foreseeable future, right? I mean, in some cases, there's a gross undersupply of talent. In other cases, there's an abundance of talent, and how that affects workforce planning, how it affects business continuity, and how work gets done. All that is in play, and organizations aren't bringing this data to the fore, to the discussion, then they're incurring, at least in my view, too much risk, unnecessary risk. So, not that I'm selling you, but like the whole space of talent intelligence, which is what we're going to talk about today, and how it can and arguably should be used to inform whether you build, buy, borrow, and all that. But before we get to that discussion, will you share what happened with Emsi and Burning Glass and where you all are now? Because I know many are curious, particularly as this talent intelligence space grows and expands. New players are coming in, and all of a sudden, you're making a lot of noise in a good way. So, can you share what happened there?
Absolutely, yeah. So when we came through the pandemic, we were very fortunate to be a growing company still, and as different investors were reaching out, this wonderful merger opportunity came available. And Burning Glass, we had competed with them for 20 years, and so our names were synonymous in most conversations. We were always considered, and so we always had just a strong positive view of them. And when we had the opportunity to come together through the private equity company that owns us both, it was a wonderful match. And so we were able to take a lot of the wonderful work that they were doing, match it up with the work that we were doing. And it really was a really nice synergy between some of the modeling that they had, some of the libraries that we had. They loved that we had open sourced our job title library and our skill library. That was something that meshed really well with some of the rigor and different data models that they had around skills and titles. And so we've been able to mesh that in over the last year to push our data together, push our solutions together, and kind of have a go forward market strategy of having singular solutions, and they're extremely robust. So we gathered more global data. We gathered some key internal processes that have really improved our data gathering process. And so we also just picked up wonderful colleagues. And so it's been a really fun journey. And our private equity company, KKR, that owns us, we're actually sitting under their social impact fund. And so we actually have to adhere to some of the UN sustainability goals as part of being that fund. And so they wholeheartedly embraced our open source strategy with our data, and they want more. And so we're continuing to push new strategies for what else can we open source, what can we put out there in the market to be a light in that data for good. So really excited about our owners and about our merger with Burning Glass. It's been a really fun experience, and we got some really fun things coming up in the near future that we're excited to share in the coming months.
Yeah, and I'll just tee it up right now. On June 16th, we're going to be there in your hometown of Minneapolis doing a mini conference and a meetup for that community. And it's going to be a hybrid event. So if you want to watch and join the discussion via a live stream here on LinkedIn or on YouTube, you can do that. So, hey, let's get into this because as you're talking, I'm getting all excited. And I want to stage what we're going to talk about in this context is that I was once nearly 20 years ago now, in role as a people analytics leader. And it was before that was even called that. But the idea at that time was that we would be looking at internal data to better understand the workforce and where it was going. In other words, what were people thinking and feeling, and how can we have retention strategies? How can we have internal mobility strategies? How can we focus our learning strategies? All fine and good, right? And that has evolved over that time. We have this talent market data that has become more robust. And it helps not only shed light on how we can and should be recruiting and where our location strategy should be, considering where we should go and recruit and build offices and all that stuff, but it's also the fact that it sheds light on our own organizations. And so, arguably, and this is something that I advocate, people analytics and talent intelligence, if not the same, it's just an expansion of one or the other into a cohesive view of what's happening in your organization relative to the greater talent market. So, with that as a staging, how do you advocate your solutions be used within organizations and by who?
It's a wide variety, and I think as you've hit the nail on the head with, it used to be this like HR analytics function that was usually off the side of someone's desk, and now it's becoming such a central part to the talent discussion because we've experienced things like talent shortages and recruiting gets a lot harder. So all of a sudden talent acquisition is in the mix of saying we got to understand our markets better. And then we have folks like workforce planning say, well, we're about to open a new location. Where do we need to find these people? Is this location sustainable? And then real estate strategy gets involved, and the list goes on and on. And then you start to look at, well, we can't just always hire externally. It gets really expensive for certain roles. It's not always cost effective to hire externally. Now you have a talent management org getting involved to say, what is our internal mobility strategy? What is our internal talent pipeline look like? Do we have the right succession plans in place? Do we have good development programs to retain the right folks and strategically move them throughout the org as to keep them here and keep them interested in our company? And so the customer base has really expanded into almost the entire HR organization to a certain extent, because everything touches talent, everything from employer relations and learning development and workforce planning. Like the core to the biggest cost of all companies is people. And so when you start to actually do some plans around that, you realize the value of not only understanding your internal workforce, but looking outside your four walls to say, okay, in order for us to be successful strategically long term, we have to understand the markets that we're in, our talent strategy for where do we pull in people? Do we have the option for remote and telecommuter work, or do we have to stay, in person? And that varies by industry and company type. Of, do you have a manufacturing facility? Yeah, very hard to do remote work. It's the pandemic was extremely hard on those talent orgs that had that requirement of in-person work. A little bit easier for some of the software companies, but as we've seen with the talent shortages, the cost for data scientists and software engineers is skyrocketing because there is limited supply and huge demand from all these wonderful startups that are popping up. So the talent struggles are not getting easier to any stretch of the means, and more groups are having to come together to solve the holistic talent problem.
Well, I certainly agree. And I also want to ask pointedly, where do you think we are? And being a data geek, on a 10-point scale, where are we kind of in general terms on a maturity curve, if you will, in terms of, hey, organizations, most large organizations in particular, but this applies to small and medium-sized organizations as well. Where do you think we are in terms of where we're going to be relative to 5 years down the road in the utilization of this type of insight for the purposes that you just described? Do you think we're early, or pretty mature?
I think we're very early. I mean, I'd say the big orgs are probably maybe a 4 or 5. The smaller mediums are maybe a 2 or 3. They're just starting that journey. The wonderful thing about this innovation is there's amazing platform and solutions out there that are popping up that, AI is really helping this, but I don't think that's quite mature enough yet. All of those models are getting better, and the access to data is getting better, and how things interact and plug in, to interface with one another. That there needs to be a lot of improvement in the space. So I think we're still really early on, and as technology develops and as these solutions develop and come together to integrate more effectively, I think we're going to see the ease of seeing this data, gathering this data, making decisions from the data, and just pulling the right insights is going to become easier and easier over the next 5 years. But it's still a pretty arduous process to put together proper insights. And so you've seen some of the big orgs invest heavily. When I left United Health Group 3 years ago, there was 68 people just on our people analytics team. And so about 6 years before that, there was 4 people. And so we had this massive growth because the data appetite grew and grew and grew, and the sophistication of what was needed grew and grew and grew. And so I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. But the wonderful HR tech partners that we get to work with, they're pushing the needle on the innovation, and the easier it is to consolidate this data, put it into useful views and insights, is only going to improve over the next 5 years. So I can see us growing in that maturity model pretty fast, because AI and computer modeling and all the fun stuff we get to work on is only going to increase over time.
Well, yeah, I want to highlight a couple things, and I know we're going to talk about skills and skills-based workforce planning, but when we talk about build, buy, borrow, those constructs, which we'll also talk about from an organizational perspective, it also applies to leaders, CHROs, and others who are building a people analytics capability. Because again, when I started, it was like we're trying to do significant heavy lifts internally with limited resources, and we started to partner certainly with technology providers and consultancies. But now, what am I going to do given the proliferation of data? I am not going to build an Emsi Burning Glass solution. That is something that I need to write a check for. I mean, and it's just, I'm not selling you. It's just, am I either going to go without that insight, or I'm going to have to write a check? And it begs the question, to who and for what purpose? So again, I don't want to just, position you all as a sell job, but what I do want to highlight is not only is it about hiring the right person to lead a people analytics function, it's being an educated shopper. It's understanding what the capability you're trying to create is, and making sure you have an ecosystem of people, process, technology that enables that. Would you agree with that statement, and anything you want to qualify?
No, 100%. I mean, again, I think the HR tech stack solutions are just complicated, and there's many of them. And so doing your due diligence there to mesh with your talent strategy for the people analytics is absolutely critical, because you can always throw people at a problem, but it's not the most efficient way to do it. And so hiring a couple of those key team members, I think early on, and building that team that can paint a picture for a vision of how the data architecture should work, how the tech solution stack should work together, that is critical first hires, because then you can fill the gaps in with any, because right now the technology is not to the point where where humans can't, they have to be involved. And so we haven't replaced them yet with those insights. We still need manual data cleansing. There still needs to be some intuition on, organizing the data in the right ways. So that's where most companies struggle, is to kind of get that kind of vision established of where do we want to be. And then the noisiness of the players, it takes a lot of time to review them. I think where we always encourage customers to get their internal data right first. I mean, that's your core people data. You got to have some initial insights before you start looking externally, because that context is massively beneficial. But you need to couple it well with your internal data, and really focus on some of those key talent groups that are, potential issues for you, or really big growth opportunities for you to focus on for the near future. So it's always a phased approach, but yeah, that's where we encourage folks is get your internal data house in order. Then let's look at all of the insights that we can bring in from these, other sources that will be beneficial to create that holistic talent strategy.
Yeah, love it. And well, let's talk about skills-based workforce planning because there's a lot of, I was about to say noise. That's not fair. There's a lot of talk around skills-based workforce planning. What is it to you, and how does it come to life?
It's really taking all of the wonderful insights that are coming from the different tech solutions that we have deployed within our HR organization and trying to create some common sense with it. And we love this visual from Josh Bersin because we think it ties this well together. If you think about your LXP and your talent marketplace and your recruiting platforms and just your core HR systems, where it holds all your org and job architecture, there is a skills language typically built into most of those. But the issue that we have is none of those skills are actually the same, coming from the same library or in the same terminology, and they certainly don't have the same kind of underlying IDs to code those skill terms. And so as we think about this, we say, okay, for us to be more efficient with our decision making of where do we deploy talent, when do we go internal versus external, where do we deploy learning and to which groups, we have to understand the underlying skills, because that is the basically the atom of what describes work, of what describes learning. And we think it's a critical component because it's one of the first times we've had an ability to have a robust skill language, and something that we're very proud of for open sourcing, because we're trying to create these efficiencies and for all the vendors and all the data aspects to bring this together. And if we're using the same language with machine readable IDs that can connect these systems in a logical way, all of a sudden, all of the insights start popping much, much clearer in the systems and in that central repository of where we need to pull these together, because that is your, your internal brain of the organization. If we have the right data and it's in the same language and we can deploy our, strategies to the right spots, now we can understand the skills of our people, the skills needed for certain jobs. It helps us to plan for the future of work. So what are those future roles? What skills are needed? We might not know the names of those roles. We might just know that, hey, we're seeing a trend in this particular role, and it's going to shift more from a manual process with a human doing that work to a bot doing that work. How do we enable that? And what skills are we needed for those future jobs? Having it in a core language unlocks all of that. And then we can start to deploy early learning based on those skills and where those roles sit. We can start to look at, folks that could be a potential risk of leaving our org. How do we have proper interventions, whether it's learning interventions or development interventions or mobility interventions, to help engage them and keep them there. And skills just sheds a light on that. We used to have complicated crosswalks, or we were going with our gut instinct. That core skill language just unlocks just a wealth of data down to the very granular level that we can connect multiple things together.
So everything that you said, I mean, I'm just, if I had a tail, I'd be wagging it. But I also am ultra aware of the delta between what's possible and what's actually happening today. And we talked about the scale earlier, 2 to 4. So I'm going to bring this up as I ask this question. And it's a simple one, but the answer I know is not. Who owns this?
Mm-hmm.
And who are the key stakeholders? And that answer is probably pretty simple.
Mm-hmm.
But at what frequency do they ideally meet? And what I'm asking for right now is not so much, what's happening currently, but in your ideal future state, what would you, and it could be based on a leading practice of a company that you're working with now, but, who's leading it? Who is in the room, and at what frequency are they considering these very fundamental decisions on how work gets done?
Yeah. The conversation has moved all the way to the highest spot, to the CHROs are really starting to see the value of this. And for it to be effective, it really needs to start at the highest spot in HR. To change HR tech stack, to change some of your data modeling, to change deployment of resources towards certain key projects, it really has to start at the top. And so that's where a lot of our the companies that are really driving innovative change within their HR orgs are having really wonderful leadership sponsorship. And these conversations around skills are reaching the CEO level and the entire C-suite. So that's one thing that's been a wonderful trend where 5 years ago, we wouldn't have said that. It's like, hey, our learning and development orgs over here, they're a cost center. Let's just make sure that, we're getting something out for our employees. And now it's like, oh, our employees are leaving at a high rate. That's very expensive. Oh, we can't hire people and it's taking months and months to find the right people. And, everybody's bleeding because they're doing double work. Now, all of a sudden, the skill development conversations, the employee retention conversations are driving right to the C-suite. And that's a wonderful thing for, as we think about our employees, they are being empowered more than ever and more resources are being driven to them. And so as this trickles down from the CHRO, it really starts to get into the talent management org because they're the ones looking for these insights. Obviously, the people analytics team are usually the one gathering the data and pulling this together, trying to create their data lakes and other centralized repositories to bring in these insights. And they're creating dashboards to empower the HR business partners and the different HR leaders. So we've seen a variety of people own this data. On the job architecture, it's actually usually owned by the compensation team, which is very interesting. And so they're maintaining new job titles and new job codes and really deploying the core HRIS systems. And so there's many players, but you need that executive champion. Otherwise, none of the change happens. And what many companies end up with is they have a need for a learning solution. So the L&D team goes out and buys, an LXP or an LMS, and then it does its thing and it sits in isolation. And nobody has the foresight to say, oh, is there data flowing through that should maybe be centralized back with our other analytics work? And it's not it's just a common thing that happens. And the bullying this up to the higher leadership levels helps us to say, we should be grabbing as much data we can from our learning systems, our talent marketplace systems that are becoming extremely popular, looking at our recruiting platform. Have we extracted all the value out of our ATS? Are we meshing things back together from our core HR job architecture to make sure that we have the centralized insight? And so it takes a village, but for any of the preemptive work and kind of that broad vision of how this needs to come together, it really has to be at the highest level.
Well, I am really curious because there's a lot of HR transformation that's been going on forever, it seems like. And before COVID, there was McKinsey, Wilders Towers Watson, Mercer, Josh Bersin among them, who are saying, and even me as a minor influencer in this area, where we need new management models. The data and information that's present, what do you do with it? And, if we have our legacy silos and ways of thinking, we're going to underutilize these assets that we're talking about here today. And I'm hopeful, like you said, that it is the CHRO, that it even beyond HR, arguably, because when you talk about digital transformation, outsourcing, robotic automation, all these ways work can get done, that's a broader conversation. And I think we have room to recreate how not only HR functions, but how the organization defines work and plans for how work gets done. So again, I'm throwing my bias on top of this, but this insight, I want it to be utilized to its value. And right now, I think it's grossly underutilized. That's my bias. So I mentioned build, buy, borrow, and all that. And if you want to bring up that slide, I don't want to force you to. You don't have to. But there's so many B's now. Can you mind speaking to this real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reason we went a little bit more broad with the because the build by borrow strategy is only part of the story. And so how we think about this is, thinking about, retaining talent. So how do we bind? What are our strategies to bind the right talent? That goes beyond just building. That means, are we focused on our culture? Are we focused on extra benefits? Are we focused on differentiated development for those groups? And so that is, a critical component that doesn't get talked about enough. And then there's the bounce component of when do we need to remove folks strategically or move them to a different part of the company where their interests or where their skills might, be more efficiently used. And then thinking about the blend strategy, this is obviously part of the borrow strategy, but blend is really looking at the extended workforce and contractors and how can we change up some of the working models that we have. Do we need a full-time role, or if we're struggling to hire, can we split that into two part-time roles? Can we look at hybrid scheduling models? Some of the cool things that our customers are working on is a Uber-like app that does scheduling for call centers and different areas where you need coverage over a period of time, and they're able to log on like you're logging on to Uber or Instacart to pick your hours that you want to work. And so you think about that, and like that completely upends the workforce planning strategy, because now we can think about roles having different shift schedules and different options for engaging new employees, and that goes right into broadening our talent pools. If we go to more part-time work, does that broaden some work so we can hire some retirees that are looking for work but they don't want to work 40 hours anymore, or beyond that, is what often happens. So can we get 3 people to do 15 hours a week to cover what is needed for those roles? And so thinking about the differentiated talent pools where we do have these talent shortages, have we looked at the partnering with prisons or schools or many other areas that we can untap this talent? And then of course bot is usually talked about in the build by borrow core. That's usually the 4 cores: build by borrow bot. And it's like, with this digital transformation, how do we look at our roles and what parts of those roles could be automated, or can entire roles be automated with the use of technology or robotics? And so we think this is a pretty comprehensive list. There's certainly others out there, but this is the holistic thinking that we need to think through with our talent strategy. And one of the trends that I loved, that in my time at United Health Group, they went to a chief talent officer model. So you had the CHRO in each of our big divisions that were running the show, but they said we need to have a holistic talent view of what's happening with the development and mobility and retention strategies across all of our orgs. And so they've created kind of a sub leadership role just to focus on the talent strategy itself. And so again, super innovative. Not many companies are doing that, but we're starting to see a little bit more focus on bringing this holistic talent movement and talent retention strategy really come to the forefront. And so talking about B strategies, a little bit of a kitschy way of of talking about strategy, but it's something fun, and hopefully people can remember that.
Well, I so celebrated. So when I first stepped into this field 20 years ago, I had the great privilege of engaging the Center for Effective Organizations at USC, specifically John Boudreau, and he was sharing at the time what we really need is mental models that we can align around, so we can actually have informed discussions, not only about what's possible, but what to do, what is the appropriate action. And what you're offering is just that. This is a very accessible way of thinking. So absolutely celebrate it. And I'm frankly going to write about it. So I'm just telling you right now,
Okay.
there's more to come on that. So
You can steal all of them. We don't copyright any of that.
no stealing. We'll just keep building on top of one another's
Awesome.
work. So, hey, Mark, as we start to wrap up now, I know June 16th in Minneapolis. We're also going to be in Chicago on June 8th. We're doing a meetup on Wednesday before the Taurayos event. A lot of activity going on in the space. I'll be at Josh Berson's event, Irresistible, next week, where I know talent intelligence is going to be talked about a lot. So all that is the staging. I know you have a rebrand coming up that you can't talk about. However,
Yeah.
look out for it towards the end of June. So I'll just say that. I mean, I don't know anything about it other than the date. And so I got it marked on my calendar, and I'm really excited for you all. I think it's obvious that I've been a fan of Emsi and Burning Glass for a long time, and you specifically. So thank you for sharing. How can people learn more about you and what you all are doing and will be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, the best spot to reach me is LinkedIn. Love connecting with folks and hearing their stories, and yeah, always willing to talk shop and just talk about time in people analytics, or current time working with skills and in really fun labor data. And of course, our company website, mzbg.com. We're very excited about not saying Emsi Burning Glass. Really good for the first year to make sure that there's continuity, but we're excited to get a new company name coming up soon, like you mentioned. So Al, thanks again for having me. I truly appreciate it. Always love our interactions and collaborations, and so truly appreciate it.
Likewise, my friend. All right, you have a great rest of the day, and see you in a couple weeks. Or
Yeah,
no, yeah, 2 weeks. All
weeks.
right,
Thanks, Al.
all right,
Appreciate it. Have a
all
wonderful
right.
day.